I got merch. Duh. In part 1, we talked about John having been taken up to heaven by the Spirit, and that, according to him, the cherub of Ezekiel and the seraph of Isaiah were one and the same spirit creature, different names, same creature, and relating such a creature back to the Satan that we read in Genesis 3, that old serpent, Nachash, check it. The question we've been exploring is, what is Satan? We typically think of him as a fallen angel called Lucifer, who's actually not such a bad guy. But that's Hollywood, bun that. There are at least 3 heavenly creatures described by John. There's the cherubim, seraphim, who encircle God's throne. There are the 24 elders, and there are the angels. Satan seems to best fit the description of the seraphim, of a seraph. Seems he could have been a cherub, not an angel. God knows. Now we're asking the question, is Satan the anointed cherub of Ezekiel 28? This is an interesting passage, mainly because of the variant readings, which we will look at later. First, let's read the passage. Moreover, the word of the Lord came to me, saying, Son of man, take up lamentation for the king of Tyre, and say to him, Thus says the Lord God, You were the seal of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. You were in Eden, the garden of God. Eden was an earthly place, so if this king of Tyre was in Eden, on earth, he earthly. Every precious stone was your covering, the sardius, topaz and diamond, beryl, onyx and jasper, sapphire, turquoise and emerald with gold. The workmanship of your timbrels and pipes was prepared for you on the day you were created. Verse 14 is where it gets a bit confusing. You were the anointed cherub who covers. Say what? I established you. You were on the holy mountain of God. That's Eden. You walked back and forth in the midst of fiery stones. That's another confusing phrase. The fiery stones reminds me of Isaiah 6. I'm not saying that that's what it is, but it reminds me of Isaiah 6, where his mouth is touched by the hot coal. Anyway, you were perfect in your ways from the day you were created, till iniquity was found in you. What iniquity? By the abundance of your trading. You became filled with violence within, and you sinned. Therefore I cast you as a profane thing out of the mountain of God. And I destroyed you, O covering cherub, from the midst of the fiery stones. There they are again. Your heart was lifted up because of your beauty. You corrupted your wisdom for the sake of your splendor. I cast you to the ground. I laid you before kings, that they might gaze at you. You defiled your sanctuaries by the multitude of your iniquities, by the iniquity of your trading. Therefore I brought fire from your midst. Love that word. Midst. Fire from your midst, that your sin is the reason you'll be consumed by fire. Fire! It devoured you, and I turned you to ashes upon the earth, in the sight of all who saw you. All who knew you among the peoples are astonished at you. You have become a horror, and shall be no more forever. So, lots of questions. Doesn't seem to add up so nice and neat that this is plainly about Satan and his fall, that this anointed cherub is certainly Satan. You know, personally, I don't believe we truly have that knowledge. I believe that we can infer from what we read in the Genesis account. We can infer that the devil's sin was pride, since that's what he enticed out of Adam, that his promise to Adam was that he would become like God. But it's not certain. I don't think we actually know what went down in heaven. It's only an inference. Besides, if Ezekiel 28 is speaking of Satan, I got questions. How do you turn a spirit being into ashes? There's a riddle. Satan's spirit body isn't physical for it to be reduced to ashes. Spirit creatures have shape, they have form, but theirs is of a different substance to ours. They are not made from the dust of the earth, because they were not made to dwell here. And Jesus distinguishes between the human flesh and the spirit. Behold my hands and my feet, this is I myself, handle me and see. For a spirit does not have flesh and bones, as you see I have. They are not as we are. Also, trading? Who would Satan have been trading with, and why? What are you buying? What are you selling? If you got that, you have to click the like button. Come on. Ezekiel 28:14 is a really confusing part. The anointed cherub who covers. Who dat? What's that about? That must be a heavenly spirit creature, right? That's not a man. So far, just reading the passage, we're just left confused. Good thing I'm not done yet. Hey, have you heard of variant readings? They're not scary, don't worry. So we have the Greek version of Ezekiel 28, which is the oldest version, and the Hebrew Masoretic text type, which is later than the Greek, centuries after Christ. Orthodox churches believe that the Masoretic text type is not as faithful as the Greek, and so they use the Greek. As it turns out, they're onto something. The Greek doesn't agree with the Masoretic text type in some places. FYI, it's called Masoretic after a 5th, 6th century group of Jewish scribes. These scribes copied and recopied the Old Testament meticulously. These Hebrew copies, up until the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls in 1947, were the oldest. The Dead Sea Scrolls were copies of the Old Testament in Hebrew, dated 2-ish centuries before Christ. When we take the Greek and the Masoretic versions against the Dead Sea Scrolls, we discover that some of the Greek readings, not found in the Hebrew, are confirmed by the Dead Sea Scrolls. Deuteronomy 32:43, for example, the Greek reads different from the Masoretic, and the Dead Sea Scrolls contain the same reading as the Greek. Point being, the Dead Sea Scrolls agree with the Greek in places over the Masoretic. But like I said, don't be scared. These differences, these variants, they're not variants in theology. You won't end up with another religion. Don't get your panties in a twist. How do you even do that? So what's the Greek rendition of Ezekiel 28? Well, first let's read 14 and 16 in the King James, which is based on the Masoretic text type, as are most typical English translations. Thou art the anointed cherub that covereth, and I have set thee so. Thou wast upon the holy mountain of God. Thou hast walked up and down in the midst of the stones of fire. By the multitude of thy merchandise, they have filled the midst of thee with violence, and thou hast sinned. Therefore, I will cast thee as profane out of the mountain of God, and I will destroy thee, O covering cherub, from the midst of the stones of fire. And in the Greek, from the day that thou wast created, thou wast with the cherub. I set thee on the holy mount of God, thou wast in the midst of the stones of fire. Therefore thou hast been cast down, wounded from the mount of God, and the cherub has brought thee out of the midst of the stones of fire. Sounds like Adam. The Greek makes it sound like we're talking about Adam. If you go with the Greek, the king was with the cherub. If you go by the Masoretic text, the king is the cherub. It's up to you which text you take as authoritative. It seems that if you go with the Greek, God must have been mocking this king, likening him to Adam, in mockery. Not mockery of Adam, God loved Adam, mockery of the king. Because who was in Eden with the cherub, and who lusted after the empty promise of Satan? To become like God? Adam. And the king is like Adam in this way, in his sin, pride. Adam was like a king. He had dominion over the whole earth. You could argue that this king of Tyre is Adam reincarnated. I wouldn't do that, because biblically speaking, where do you get bodily reincarnation? Adam dead. He's with God now. Or you could argue that the spirit or the soul of Adam has possessed this king, which again, I just don't see how you would support that biblically. But hey, what do I know? What's obvious is that the king isn't literally Adam. He was not literally in the garden. He's being likened to Adam. This is if you take the Greek. And the link between the two, as I said, is their sin. That they both wanted to be like God. What if we go with the Masoretic text? That's what's found in our English translations. Would that prove that Ezekiel 28 is about Satan? No. I'll tell you why. Context. I need to calm down. Let's read verses 1 to 10. Proclamation against the king of Tyre. The word of the Lord came to me again, saying, Son of man, say to the prince of Tyre, Thus says the Lord God, because your heart is lifted up, and you say, I am a god, I sit in the seat of gods, in the midst of the seas. Pause. He's a human ruler. Yet you are a man, and not God. Homeboy, he's a man, a human ruler. Though you set your heart as the heart of a god, behold, you are wiser than Daniel. There is no secret that can be hidden from you. Pause. Know this, Ezekiel and Daniel were contemporaries. Daniel prophesied by the Spirit in the court of the king. Ezekiel with the common folk. Ezekiel, by inspiration of the Spirit, confirms his contemporary Daniel as a prophet of God. Now, God does not dishonor his prophets. He handpicks them, he honors them, he loves them. So do you really think that God literally meant that this wicked pagan king was indeed wiser than his prophet Daniel? Daniel, his servant, filled with the Spirit. Nah, bruh. Nah. God's slating him. That's what's happening. God is mocking the king through Ezekiel, mate. And if God is mocking the king here in verses 1 to 10, what makes us think he's suddenly, seriously calling him the anointed cherub who covers later? Why wouldn't we be consistent in the way that we're viewing the passage? Why wouldn't we see that this too is God mocking this king who is filled with pride against God? It's certainly like God to do so, and like prophets of God to do so. Even in his likening him to Adam, it's mockery. Adam truly was made perfect. The king wasn't. Ever. With your wisdom and your understanding you have gained riches for yourself, and gathered gold and silver into your treasuries. By your great wisdom in trade you have increased your riches, and your heart is lifted up because of your riches. If this is about Satan, how did he get rich? By trading in Eden. What was he trading? Adam and Eve were the only two people on earth. Who was he trading with? Moving on. Behold, therefore, I will bring strangers against you, the most terrible of the nations, my ancestors. And they shall draw their swords against the beauty of your wisdom, and defile your splendor. They shall throw you down into the pit, and you shall die the death of the slain in the midst of the seas. Check it. Will you say before him who slays you, I am a god? Ha 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 ha. God saying, before he who wields the sword that will slay you, dead, are you gonna say, you can't kill me, I'm a god? No, obviously not. You're gonna die. God doesn't die. Don't start. But you shall be a man and not a god. In the hand of him who slays you, you shall die the death of the uncircumcised by the hand of aliens. Don't start. For I have spoken, says the Lord God. It certainly seems that at least verses 1 to 10 is about a human ruler. And perhaps from verse 11 to 19, we're talking about the spiritual ruler behind this king. Let's continue. Verse 11 to 13. Moreover, because God ain't done yet, the word of the Lord came to me, saying, Son of man, take up a lamentation for the king of Tyre, and say to him, Thus says the Lord God, you were the seal of perfection. Really? Is God being literal? No. Mocked. Full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. You were in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone was your covering, the sardius, topaz and diamond, beryl, onyx and jasper, sapphire, turquoise and emerald with gold. The workmanship of your timbrels and pipes was prepared for you on the day you were created. You were the anointed cherub who covers. My conclusion is that God is mocking him, that he's likening him to a creature who truly was wise and beautiful, because the king certainly is nothing like such a blessed creature. As we know, as we ought to know, behind every wicked human ruler, there is a spirit ruling them, in and through them, possessing them. Anyone who thinks or behaves as if he or she is a god, anyone who exalts themselves in such a way, is under the power of Satan, because that is the lie he has told from the very beginning. And this king of Tyre is being utterly shamed through Ezekiel by God for his sin, ultimately meeting death. If you want to take the position that this passage is about Satan, which seems to me to be quite a stretch considering some of the questions we've asked about ashes and trading and such, that's fine. You're not gonna burn in hell for it. Neither am I if I am wrong. I suppose the reason I did this is because I rather enjoy shattering superficiality. I could be wrong. Anyway, thoughts? Our question was, what is Satan? At first we asked, is he really an angel? To which we could reasonably answer, no. Here we're considering whether or not the anointed cherub of Ezekiel 28 is in fact Satan. I don't believe he is. This is a really hard video to conclude, because there's no conclusion. Why have I done this? Well, I guess I'll see you later.